What if I told you that every hour you work, every product you buy, and every tax you pay is feeding an invisible machine, one that's been quietly growing for centuries? A machine that doesn't make cars, or phones, or food, but something far more abstract, debt. And here's the unsettling part. This machine doesn't just borrow money, it borrows the future. So how did humanity build a global economy that runs on promises it can never keep? And why does the system seem to demand infinite growth on a finite planet? This is the story of the global debt machine that feeds on human productivity. Our story begins not with Wall Street, but in the dusty markets of Renaissance Europe. Back then, money wasn't infinite. Gold and silver set hard limits on trade. If you didn't have coins, you couldn't buy. If you couldn't buy, you couldn't grow. But merchants, ever ambitious, found the loophole credit. They began writing promises on parchments. I'll pay you next harvest, or I'll repay after my ships return. Those promises became tradable. They had value, even before they were fulfilled. It was the birth of debt as a commodity. Something that could be created, sold, and multiplied. By the 15th century, families like the Medici transformed these promises into banking empires. They realized something profound. You don't need gold to rule an economy. You just need trust and the ability to issue debt. From that insight, the modern banking system was born. The next great leap came in 1694, with the founding of the Bank of England. Facing war and bankruptcy, the British Crown did something radical. It borrowed from private investors, issuing bonds backed by future taxes. That was the moment when national debt, a country owing money to its own citizens and foreign lenders, became a tool of empire. Suddenly, the king's military ambitions didn't end when his coffers were empty. He could now borrow the future productivity of his people. The age of exploration was, in many ways, financed by this new debt machine. Ships were built with borrowed money. Colonies were founded on loans, and as new lands were exploited, the returns fed the investors who had funded it all. Debt and growth became inseparable. The logic was simple. Borrow to grow to repay. Borrow more to grow faster, and the cycle never stopped. The Industrial Revolution turned this feedback loop into overdrive. Factories could now produce more than ever, but they needed constant investment, so banks flooded the world with credit. Governments joined in, issuing bonds to build railways, telegraphs, armies. By 1900, global debt had become the lifeblood of modern civilization. But a machine built on perpetual growth has one fatal flaw: what happens when growth stops. The early 20th century gave us the answer. World War I left nations drowning in debt. Germany owed reparations it could never pay. Hyperinflation devoured savings overnight. The Great Depression followed a catastrophic collapse of confidence in credit itself. It seemed the debt machine had hit a wall. Then, in 1944, global leaders met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to rebuild. Their solution: a new monetary system anchored by the US dollar, which in turn was tied to gold. Stability through discipline. Or so they thought, but even gold had limits. By the 1970s, US spending on Vietnam and social programs outpaced its reserves. And in 1971, President Nixon made a fateful announcement. The United States will suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. In that moment, the last tether between money and physical reality was cut. The dollar became pure fiat, backed not by gold, but by trust and debt. The global debt machine was now fully unchained. From that day forward, every dollar in existence came into being as someone else's debt. You borrow to buy a house. Companies borrow to expand. Governments borrow to fund deficits. Central banks create new money by lending to commercial banks, who lended, again, wheat, interest. And interest means the system must always expand to pay back more than it creates. Since 1971, global debt has exploded more than 100-fold, surpassing $300 trillion by the 2020s. That's nearly 3.5 times the world's total economic output. But where does all that money go? A small portion funds innovation and growth. The rest circles endlessly through financial markets, derivatives, speculation, buybacks, money chasing money, detached from real productivity. The result? The top 1% now holds more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Productivity has risen, but wages stagnate. Governments rely on central banks to keep interest rates low or risk collapse. In other words, we're trapped in a cycle where the debt machine must keep feeding, or it dies. And when it dies, so does everything built on top of it. 2008 should have been the breaking point. The financial system froze under the weight of its own leverage, but instead of resetting, central banks chose to print trillions in new money. Zero interest rates. Quantitative easing. It worked. Temporarily. Markets roared back, but each fix made the machine larger, hungrier, more unstably. Then came the pandemic. Lockdowns halted productivity, but debt creation soared higher than ever before. Governments paid citizens with money that didn't exist the year prior. Today, every attempt to slow down raising rates, reducing spending threatens to crash the very system it's meant to protect. We've built an economy that can't survive without ever-expanding promises. Now, new players are entering the stage. Digital currencies, sovereign crypto projects, algorithmics, each promises to fix money, but many simply reinvent debt. In digital form, even AI, the next revolution in productivity, risks becoming fuel for the same old cycle. More efficiency, more profits, more borrowing. Meanwhile, the global debt-to-GDP ratio keeps climbing, reaching levels unseen in human history. And still, the world's central banks whisper the same mantra. We can manage it. But can we? So, what can we learn from this centuries-long experiment? First, debt is not inherently evil, but when it becomes the foundation of growth, it distorts everything built upon it. Second, productivity gains don't always mean prosperity. When systems are structured to transfer wealth upward through debt, progress becomes extraction. And third, any system that demands infinite expansion will eventually consume itself, or be forced to evolve. We've inherited a world powered by borrowed time and borrowed value. The global debt machine isn't a villain in itself. It's a mirror of human ambition, fear, and faith. And tomorrow, but faith, like credit, must be earned. If we want to build an economy that serves people instead of feeding on them, we'll need to rethink what growth truly means. Because until we do, every minute of human productivity will continue to oil the gears of a machine that can never stop turning. The question isn't whether it will stop, it's when and what comes after.